Yeah, Gurmagad Cahirlock, and I want to welcome the Minister to the House. Thank you, Minister, for coming here today to respond to my commencement matter, which speaks to the need for the Government to provide financial supports and other supports to the taxi service industry. And can I just say, Minister, I want to congratulate you and the Government, I suppose, to start with. Today is a hopeful day. The announcement yesterday was very welcome by all sectors of industry and community, and I think we're all looking forward with much greater hope today than we have been for a very long time. So I just want to commend you and the Government. And I suppose it's been a very challenging year. I want to acknowledge the supports that Government has put in place for businesses and for community organisations and for families to help us all through from a financial perspective, but also, I suppose, from a services perspective. But as I've said, Minister, my commencement matter today actually speaks to the Government's need to respond to the taxi sector. Being a city dweller myself, and anybody living in any of our cities or our rural towns will be aware of how vitally important taxis are to our public transportation services. There's more than 23,000 licensed taxis in the country, and they are a really important mode of public transportation. They are safe, they're economical, they offer city dwellers and urban dwellers an alternative to owning a private car. So hugely important. Continued to operate during the pandemic and have provided a really vital public transport service right in the front line, right throughout the pandemic. Minister, I appreciate this isn't your remit, but the NTA did conduct a survey on the impact of the pandemic on taxi drivers, and their own research shows that more than 97%, almost 100% of all taxi drivers have suffered a massive decrease in income since the pandemic. But at the same time, almost 100% of the taxi drivers had introduced measures at their own cost to ensure that their services could continue to operate in a safe way, in a COVID-safe way. So they installed the barriers, they wore masks, introduced hand sanitizers, adopted cashless payments. And all of that at expense to themselves. And throughout the pandemic, Minister, the taxi drivers have had, as a business operators, they've had no support. The only support they were provided with was the pandemic unemployment payment, and I accept and recognise that last October they were given the opportunity to continue to earn up to €480 a month. But out of that, Minister, they've got fixed annual costs of €11,000 a year. So instead of actually using their pandemic unemployment payment to pay for their groceries and their family expenses, they've actually been paying for their insurance, their cost of maintenance. On top of that, they've an obligation, Minister, to renew their car every 10 years. I accept that last October the Minister did introduce a delay and there is a pause until June of this year, but that expires then at the end of this year for those registration, the renewal fees and the registrations. And it is unrealistic to expect any business to make a once-in-a-decade capital investment in their business when they have been more or less without a livelihood for the last 12 months. And finally, Minister, the taxi drivers themselves have lost confidence in the taxi advisory group. And as I said at the outset, these are a vital component in our public transportation infrastructure and services, and I would urge the Minister to respond to that lack of confidence that the taxi sector has expressed in the taxi advisory group and advise the House on how the Minister intends to respond to that situation. Gurmagad.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Senator. Minister Fleming, you have 4 minutes.
On behalf of Minister Ryan, I would like to thank the Senator for raising this matter here today. And at the outset, I will say to the Senator, the remarks you've made here today, I will report directly back to Minister Ryan directly on the point you make today, if I don't get to cover them all myself here in the short time available. The Government is acutely aware of the very difficult situation facing the taxi and small public service vehicle industry, or SPSV industry. Only yesterday, the Minister met with the Advisory Committee on SPSVs to hear first-hand about their difficulties facing the sector and to discuss the challenges ahead. The sector is particularly dependent on the hospitality industry, and the gradual reopening of society over the next months should hopefully see passenger demand for services beginning to return. Nevertheless, we aren't there yet, and I think people understand that. The COVID-19 continues to have a profound effect on the working lives of individuals from all walks of life right across the country. That is why the Government has put in place support measures with broad eligibility criteria. Self-employed individuals, such as taxi operators, can and have availed of these supports, including the pandemic unemployment payment, liquidity and investment measures, and tax relief measures. And I want to use my time here today to mainly talk about the supports available to taxi drivers, but the Minister has asked me to deal with two issues specifically. First, I want to reiterate this on behalf of the Minister. There are no plans to change the access arrangements to bus lanes. This has been made clear to taxi representatives in the Minister's meeting and his department correspondence with them, and I sincerely hope this clarifies the matter once and for all. I reiterate, there are no plans to change access arrangements to bus lanes. Secondly, it has been 2 decades since quantitative controls on the taxi industry were lifted. It is well known that the taxi industry has been badly affected by COVID-19, and as the experience over the last 2 years has shown, there are very few people wishing to enter the industry. A moratorium and licence would not deliver any practical benefit to anyone, and accordingly there are no plans to introduce one, primarily for the very practical reason there are not a large number of people seeking to enter the industry in the first place. The Government is committed to providing practical supports to assist SPSV operators and to supporting drivers return to work when circumstances allow. This is why self-employed individuals, including taxi drivers, can earn up to €960 in an 8-week period. That's €120 per week, or almost €6,240 net of expenses, without jeopardising their PUP payment. So they can actually continue in business, do a small amount of business and earn up to 120 net of expenses. That's profit on top of their PUP. But I do understand that's not enough in itself, because the level of business is not out there to justify taxi drivers all going back on the road. And I understand normally you could have well over 1,000 taxi drivers at Dublin Airport on any given day. It was mentioned to me there's only approximately 40 up there on any given day at this stage. So that 120 is a good system in place for those who are in a position to do it, but there isn't enough business going around for a lot of taxi drivers to avail of that. Furthermore, taxi operators coming off the PUP payment and returning to work full-time can avail of the Enterprise Support Grant, a €1,000 grant that they can use towards the costs associated with reopening a business, and this can include personal protective equipment, vehicle costs and cleaning supplies. And a suite of COVID-19 measures is complemented by specific industry measures. The National Transport Authority has introduced late fee waivers, facilitated temporary licence suspensions and insurance suspension, and provides guidance to operators on reducing the risk of COVID. Also, the Department of Transport has provided the waiving of all standard taxi licence renewal fees for 2021 at a cost of €2.6 million to date.
Thank you, Minister. Senator, you have a moment to respond.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Minister, for your response. And I do welcome the fact that the Minister has clarified the situation with regards to the bus lanes. That's an operational matter, and it is important that there's clarity around that issue. But I also welcome the supports which you mentioned, and the fact that taxi drivers can earn up to €120 a week. But Minister, they can't. There is no business. That is the truth of it. And they have fixed costs of €11,000 a year. And Minister, I welcome the fact that the Minister for Transport is willing to engage. But I would actually urge you, Minister, to go back and ask the Minister for Transport to come and meet with representatives from the taxi drivers, from the taxi drivers generally, with representatives from the government party Oireachtas members. Because it is really important that we actually carve out an agreed partnership here for a sustained future for this vital public transportation service that actually makes it sustainable into the future for the next 5-10 years. And I would also ask you a specific request, Minister, that you ask the Minister for Transport to extend the 10-year vehicle requirement up to 2025. They've lost the best part of 2 years in terms of the operation of those vehicles, 2 years of their livelihoods. They're not in a position to make a once-in-a-decade capital investment in their business. And I think it would be a gesture of sincere commitment to that sector if the Government and if the Minister was to extend that period up to 2025. Gurmagad.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Senator, and specifically into your two specific requests, please be assured that I will speak directly to the Minister about meeting with representatives of taxi drivers. You said members of the government party as well. And also you mentioned the issue of extending the 10-year rule in relation to the requirement that they must be replaced every 10 years. I understand, and I'm subject to correction, that that's in place for this year, but it wasn't in place last year. There's a bit of a laguna, and taxi drivers might be waiting for clarification on that. I'm not in a position to say any of that will happen, except to say I will take your concerns directly to the Minister. And finally, you will know that there is, in relation to the support the purchase of electrical vehicles, the amount available has been increased up to 15 million, and this will allow 20,000 for operators who scrap older vehicles and make the switch to full electric models. That's a very good scheme, but I know with the income being so tight, they mightn't have the funding to finance the balance of the cost of the car. But it is a very generous grant scheme, but I know finding the balance of the funding is very difficult, and it's an issue that I will take directly back to the Minister. Thank you.